What's the worst mistake you've seen someone make at their job? Story 1. Before retiring, I was a branch manager for my state's DMV. Suddenly, one of the other managers called in sick for a few days. Then it became a week, 2 weeks. Eventually, the auditors completed their investigation, and she was gone. It turned out she had been accepting bribes from aspiring truck drivers to let them pass the written test. She was making an extra $100 to $250 a week. The dumb part? The pay was decent, and the benefits were fantastic. She gave all that up, good pay, great benefits, and a really nice retirement, for some extra spending money. Then there was the assistant manager, who would pocket anywhere from $750 to $1,500 a week, a bigger payoff. But she was taking it directly from the day's cash receipts. She had only ever worked for the DMV, moving her way up from clerk, and had no idea that there are accounting systems within accounting systems. The bank would send over deposit discrepancy reports, which she would casually toss out, not realizing that the exact same report was also sent to our central office. The wheels of state government turned slowly, so she managed to get away with it for over a year, but once those wheels start turning, they don't stop. She ended up going to prison and was ordered to pay over $30,000 in restitution. The branch manager was also fired because the investigation revealed he was rarely in the office and had left everything up to the assistant manager. Story 2. Working with a tree-cutting service in Tampa, I was asked by the boss to climb a nearby tree and cut some limbs. After seeing how close they were to the power lines, I refused. He got really pissed off and yelled at me to just clean up the area. Then he sent up Dallas. Dallas put on his climbing spikes, roped up the tree, and started cutting. I was worried and kept watching him as I picked up limbs. Sure enough, he leaned back and before I could yell, pressed his sweaty bare back right against the power lines. A bright blue flash arced across his back, his body jerked against the tree trunk, then bounced off and slammed into the wires again. And again. Finally, his spikes came loose and he fell, hanging upside down when his safety line caught him like a broken-back doll. I thought he was dead, but a moment later he started moaning, then screaming, "I'm on fire." We lowered him to the ground as sirens approached. A neighbor had seen what happened and called EMTs. A nasty black mark curved across his back, and the current had surged down his legs and out through his boot heels, blowing them apart. I quit at the end of the day. Story 3. There was a company in rural New York in the late 1960s that took scrap metal, melted it down in big coal-fired crucibles, and made home decor pieces, doorstops shaped like little dogs, bookends, that kind of thing. Not a huge profit margin, but their materials were cheap and they had a steady market. An industrial consultant convinced them to transition to electric furnaces, significant upfront expense, but much lower ongoing operating costs. The consultant even designed the new electric crucibles for the company. The company president had been considering expanding operations, so he asked the consultant to double the size of the electric crucible designs. The consultant did so, but made a mistake with the cube-square law when designing the supports. The first time the double-sized, but nearly 4 times as heavy, crucibles were filled with scrap and fired up, they collapsed, flooding the factory floor with molten metal and wrecked equipment. The company went straight into bankruptcy. Story 4. A few coworkers and I were complaining about a new hire who happened to be black. We were upset because he wasn't showing up, wasn't doing what he was supposed to, and was leaving us to pick up the slack. We were all suggesting reasonable punishments. He should be suspended, he should be written up, he should be fired, and so on. Then one of our other new hires, I'll call him Jeff, decided to chime in and said, "You know, I got a few cousins out in Virginia. We could always lynch him." We were all stunned and immediately tore into Jeff for suggesting something so horrible. He was reported and suspended for about a week, and I'm still shocked they didn't fire him on the spot. A few weeks later, we got another new hire, also black. He was hanging up one of our safety chains and accidentally dropped it. As he bent down to pick it up, Jeff walked by and said, "With your ancestry, I'd think you'd know how to handle a chain." That time Jeff didn't get suspended, he was fired on the spot. And he actually insisted he didn't understand why he was being punished. He was a complete idiot. Story 5. I worked at a jail as a corrections tech. One day, an inmate had an allergic reaction. A CO, let's call him Farva, came into the tank with the nurse. This was an open tank with about 15 to 20 other inmates inside. The nurse decided to administer an EpiPen. Farva took the EpiPen from the nurse and tried to administer it himself. To clarify, a fully trained and educated nurse had a medical instrument taken out of her hands by the biggest idiot ever. Farva held the auto-injector upside down, with his thumb over the needle, and plunged it into the inmate's thigh, sending the needle straight into his own thumb. Now the CO is on the ground. The nurse has no extra EpiPens, and the inmate is on the verge of dying. The other COs are on their way, but I have no idea how to even explain what just happened. Luckily, the nurse was able to run back to the nurse's station, grab another EpiPen, and save the inmate in time. The kicker? Farva only got a warning. He almost killed an inmate. That whole jail was a circus. Story 6. A local dealership was promoting a contest where they would give away a truck. I was driving around with my parents, who were visiting from out of state, when we heard the commercial for the giveaway on the radio. The drawing was in about 15 minutes, and since we were right there, we stopped in and put our names in the collection bin. I watched them take the bin upstairs, out of sight of the crowd. They had clearly picked the winner in the back room and announced that if the winner wasn't present, they'd be contacted later to claim the prize. So they chose a winner, and it was clearly someone from out of state. What they didn't realize was that it was my mom, who was just visiting for the weekend. She walked right up to the announcer, showed her license, and said, "I'm so happy I won the truck." The look on their faces was priceless. For the next couple of weeks, the dealership tried everything to avoid giving us the truck. It was obvious they hadn't actually planned on giving one away. But we prevailed, and I'm happy to say we love that truck. Story 7. I was an assistant manager for a large gas station convenience store. One night, on my day off, one of my clerks called and said, "Hey, how bad is it if, supervisor, just saw me chug a beer in the cooler?" I said, "Well, you're drinking a beer, which you stole, on the clock, in a building where it's illegal to consume alcohol, and you're 18, so pretty bad." The clerk said, "Supervisor, might not have seen me, but I was just checking." I replied, "You do realize I'm one of your managers, right? You just told your manager that you stole a beer and drank it on the clock." The clerk hung up immediately, so I called the store manager and looped in the supervisor. I asked, "Supervisor, this is going to sound strange, but did you see anything unusual in the cooler today when you visited my store?" "Supervisor, no, I wasn't there to walk your store. I was just picking something up to transfer to another store." Me. "Okay, well, I just got a call from clerk." Explain the call. Obviously, this kid was getting fired. Anyone should have known their job was over. But, thanks to corporate paperwork, we still had to schedule a meeting to formally terminate him. Usually when someone knows they're about to be fired, they just stop showing up. This kid was not most people. He showed up in uniform, ready to work his next shift like nothing had happened. So the supervisor, store manager, and I all sat down with him in the back room. "Supervisor, we need to discuss what happened yesterday in the cooler when I came by the store." Clerk, "Oh, I didn't think you saw that." Supervisor, "I didn't. But when you called, OP was required to tell me and the store manager. When we checked the cameras, we clearly saw you drinking the beer." Clerk, "There are cameras in there." The cameras were not hidden. Clerk, "So, did you guys see all the other stuff too?" The three of us looked at each other. Then the supervisor said, "Yes, we've seen everything. But we want you to tell us about it all, and if you're honest, we can discuss what happens next." The clerk then launched into a full confession, listing every time he'd drunk, smoked, and stolen cash over the last 6 months. The supervisor told him to go home and wait for a follow-up meeting. We already knew cash was missing, and internal security was investigating, but the rest had been brushed off as normal inventory loss. Nobody has time to comb through video from a 24-hour store with 30-plus cameras. With his confession, though, security went back and reviewed every shift he'd worked for the last 6 months. Turns out he was stealing beer, Swishers, Black & Milds, and cigarettes every shift, plus pocketing around $300 a week. He'd even come up with a sneaky way of hiding cash theft using change left on gas pumps and gift card transfers, which eventually led to a corporate-level change in how those transactions were handled. A couple of days later, the clerk was scheduled to return. I thought there was no way he'd show. I was wrong. He came back in uniform, ready to work. We sat down again, and the supervisor laid out every incident we had evidence for and officially terminated his employment. The clerk was shocked. I imagine he was even more shocked when the company took him to court for about $8,000 in stolen cash and inventory. Story 8. Back in 2010, while Gottschall, one of the top law firms in the world, represented the debtors in the WAMU bankruptcy. My firm represented an investor who had filed a lawsuit on behalf of a class of warrant holders, arguing that the warrants created a debt obligation rather than equity. It was an all-or-nothing case. If we were right and the warrants were debt, the class would get a decent recovery. If WAMU was right and they were equity, the class got nothing. Wall thought our argument was such a long shot that they handed the case to a 14th-year associate. For reference, the partnership track is usually 8 to 10 years, so this was someone who had been slogging through 3,000 plus billable hours a year, desperately trying to make partner, but hadn't succeeded. In other words, not Weil's best of the best. The governing document was an old warrant purchase agreement from a WAMU predecessor bank. Neither Weil nor we had a signed physical copy, since it was nearly 20 years old. Instead, we had to rely on an old 8K filing that had a .txt draft of the agreement attached. Weil's associate filed a motion to dismiss our lawsuit, asserting that the version in the 8K was the final version. We spent months litigating issues around that motion, assuming it was the correct document, because Weil had certified under penalty of perjury that it was. On the day of the hearing, my client and I were reviewing the old Edgar docket and discovered another version of the agreement, publicly filed a few months later. It was buried as a .txt file among numerous exhibits to an unrelated filing that didn't even mention the agreement. The two versions were identical except for the signatures, dates, and one word. May had been changed to shall in one operative provision. That single word change completely invalidated Weil's primary argument. We walked into court and dropped the bombshell. Weil had spent months and hundreds of hours arguing based on the wrong version of the document, and the correct version made our victory almost certain. I looked over at the associate during the hearing. He was in absolute shock. The judge adjourned the hearing due to the new evidence, and we all went home. The very next day, a partner at Weil emailed us to say he had taken over the case. When I checked Weil's website, the associate was already gone, fired. A month later, the judge issued an opinion denying the motion to dismiss. That alone caused the price of the warrants our client held to jump from around 10 cents a share to nearly $90. Our client sold all of its warrants immediately, and we withdrew from the case. It ended up being one of the biggest victories of my career. Story 9. I'm a tattoo artist, and I've got two stories. These weren't massive screw-ups that affected a ton of people, but they were serious enough to require immediate removals and firings. We had a new apprentice on the job less than 2 weeks. We had already taken the time to show him everything related to his daily and weekly duties, so he knew what was expected. The first time he tried to clean the metal tubes and piercing equipment in the clean room before putting them in the autoclave, he didn't wear gloves. He had cleaned maybe 2 tubes of excess ink before I caught him. I explained that whenever he handled equipment, he needed to wear gloves because there are a ton of risks: HIV, hepatitis, staph, etc. Instead of just admitting his mistake, he grabbed the metal brush he was using, started scrubbing it hard on his bare hand, and said, "Dude, that shit is so rare, I don't know why you'd even worry about it." I stared at him for about 10 seconds, then told him to grab his stuff, get the hell out, and not bother coming back. The second one was a street tattoo artist who came in for an apprenticeship. We agreed to let him continue working with his existing clients under our supervision, but not on walk-ins. He'd also be responsible for cleaning and the usual apprentice tasks, even though he was still doing a couple of tattoos a month. Within the first month, I showed him how to make his own shading ink and store it properly, so he wouldn't need to remix it every time he poured a cap. The next morning, I came into the shop early for an appointment and found him at the sink we used for cleaning metal tubes. He was using the metal scrubber to clean excess ink out of an old plastic bottle of red ink. I said, "What the hell are you doing? That's unsanitary. You need to throw that bottle away right now." Instead of owning up, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "What the customer doesn't know won't hurt them." I told him, "No, that's exactly the kind of thing that will hurt them and could potentially kill them." Then I told him to grab his stuff, get out, and not come back. Story 10. Not an employee story, but a customer one. My coworker and I had to deliver a huge fridge and get it through a small doorway. Even with the door taken off the hinges, it wouldn't fit. We told the homeowner we could leave it in the garage until he had the frame removed. About a week later, we came back to try again. We finally managed to get it past the doorway, but it didn't fit between his counter and the wall. He had marble countertops, and we didn't want to damage them or the fridge, so we tried lifting it sideways to get it over. Still no luck, because a ceiling beam blocked the way. We told the customer the fridge was simply too big and offered to return it so he could get a smaller one. The guy was furious. He started ranting about how stupid we were for not being able to move it in. At that point, I told him we were done and not sticking around to take the abuse. We set the fridge down and left, no doors on it or anything. He cursed us out, saying he'd do it himself with no problem. The next day, we were called back to the same house to pick up the fridge. I told my manager I was uncomfortable going, but we were the only ones in the area, so we went. The man's wife and son answered the door and let us in. The guy himself was nowhere to be seen. When we walked into the kitchen, we saw that he had completely destroyed his countertop and part of the ceiling trying to force the fridge in. The son explained that they had tried lifting it the way we had, but the dad had pushed and forced it. To make it worse, the fridge was out of the return window, so he only got refunded the delivery and installation fee. We were just there to haul it away, as he insisted. Word of advice: if you're going to buy a new fridge, measure, measure, and measure again. Story 11. In 13 years of dealing cards at multiple casinos, the answer to this question is me. This story will really only interest gamblers, so fair warning, you might get lost. I was dealing blackjack. Two of our highest VIP members were at the table. One guy had a $20,000 bet. He got dealt aces and went to split. Now it was a $40,000 hand. On the first ace, he pulled a 9 for 20. When I went back to pull the next card for his other ace, the card got stuck halfway. I ended up pulling the card behind the one he was supposed to get. Of course, the card he should have had was a face card that would have given him 21. I froze. Listen, if this had been a $5 to $25 hand, I would have just kept going. But at high-limit tables, surveillance is guaranteed to be watching every move. And dealers can be held personally responsible for mistakes like this. The casino could even take me to court to prove I wasn't colluding with the player. So I stopped, called over the supervisor, and asked him to get the pit boss. I explained the situation quietly. His eyes lit up like a Christmas tree. He couldn't believe it. He immediately called surveillance, and they confirmed on video that I had indeed pulled the wrong card. So now the player had to get his original card, which turned out to be a 4 or 5. Meanwhile, I got his face card and ended up with 21. Holy hell, I nearly puked in my mouth. In the end, I got a pat on the back for staying calm and doing the right thing, but I also got a big fat $0 tip from the two guys, who were normally awesome to deal to. And I respected that 100% because it was my mistake. At the end of the day, the hand played out exactly as it should have, but me pulling that wrong card, making 21, and robbing him of his face card absolutely killed the night. Story 12. My first day at my first job was at a small pet shop. My family had been friends with the owner for years, and I'd been asking for a job there since I was 10. I knew a ton about animals, but I was really nervous. My manager, who was supposed to train me, had chipped her tooth half an hour before my shift, so it ended up being just me, one other employee, and the owner in the back tending to animals. I was asked to do water changes, so I went ahead and changed the water for every tank in the store, all by myself. And I forgot to add dechlorinator to the water. We realized the mistake when suddenly all the betta fish started flipping over dead about 10 minutes later. I killed probably 50 fish. The other girl working swore when she figured it out, told me to get out of the way, and ran around dumping prime into every tank as fast as she could. I ran into the feeder rat room and sat there crying for about an hour until the owner came to find me. He saw how upset I was and was wonderful about it, telling me it was an honest mistake and that I'd obviously never forget it again. I was still so devastated that I tried to quit, but he stopped me and told me to keep going. He didn't even dock my pay for the hundreds of dollars worth of fish I had killed. I ended up working there until I moved away for college a few years later. Thankfully, I never killed anything else, and I worked my butt off to be the best employee and caretaker I could be. But I'll always feel immense guilt when I remember that day. Story 13. I've got a couple of stories. When I was a teenager working at McDonald's, I saw someone drop a piece of jewelry into the fry oil. They tried to grab it as it sank, and ended up plunging their hand and half their forearm into 450-degree oil. They ran out screaming, and we never saw them again. Later, while working at a tire shop, I saw someone use an old bottle jack to lift a semi. As they started taking the tires off, the jack failed, and the entire trailer dropped onto their legs, pinning them under the tire. To explain, when you take tires off a semi, you lift it just a couple of inches, sit on the ground with your legs around the bottom of the tire, and use your legs to help lift as you pull it off. Crazily enough, the guy wasn't hurt too badly for one big reason. He was enormous. We called him Big Joe. He was 7 feet 2 inches and proportionally massive, like someone had clicked drag and expand on him. Any normal-sized person would have had their legs crushed, but he walked away with just some nasty bruises. Another tire shop story. One of my former managers was killed by an exploding industrial tire. These tires use locking rings to hold them on the rim, but if the ring isn't set properly, it can blow off when you start airing the tire up. They explode with enough force to go straight through a person and still have the power to embed into steel or concrete. That's exactly what happened to him. I didn't see it myself, but I heard about it later. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.